My name is Keith, and these are my stamps. Today, episode 27, the Azores. The Azores are 9 volcanic islands in the Atlantic Ocean, about 1,400 kilometers, that's 870 miles west of mainland Portugal. The name the Azores comes from the Portuguese word for the Eurasian goshawk. It's Açor. And the first explorers saw many birds of prey on the islands when they arrived, and they thought they were goshawks, hence the name. However, scientists have since thought that they were actually buzzards or kites. However, the name stuck. The Azores are divided into 3 groups geographically. From the most westerly group, Corvo and Flores, it's about 230 kilometers, 140 miles, to the middle group, which is Faial, Pico, São Jorge, Graciosa, and Terceira. And from the middle group down to the most easterly island, which is Santa Maria there with São Miguel, is around about 300 kilometers, 186 miles. The Azores were formed from the mid-Atlantic ridge, the volcanic activity there, and Corvo and Flores are on the west side of the ridge. The other islands are on the eastern side. And so Corvo and Flores are moving further away from the rest of the islands, about 25 millimeters a year, which is around about an inch, which, since the first settlements, amounts to 15 meters or 16.5 yards. Overall, the Azores are 2,351 square kilometers, that's 908 square miles, which is a little larger than the US Virgin Islands, or about the size of Cheshire in England. The population, 236,440, which is the equivalent of Richmond, Virginia, or Aberdeen in Scotland. I chopped out some of the Atlantic to get all of the islands on here a little closer. The language of the islands is Portuguese, and there are 3 capitals, which I've circled there. Horta, which is the legislative capital, Angra de Heroísmo, the judicial capital, and Ponta Delgada, the executive capital. The Azores were discovered at the start of the 14th century, although there is some debate as to who actually discovered them and when. However, it is agreed that the first settlers arrived in 1439 on Santa Maria and São Miguel. If you remember, those are the islands closest to Portugal. In 1450, there was settlement on what was known as Jesus Christ Island. It was the 3rd island to be settled, so they decided to change the name to the Portuguese word for third, Terceira. The other islands were gradually settled in the 1400s, except for Corvo, which wasn't settled until 1580. The settlers were mostly Portuguese, but there were also plenty of Flemish people who were escaping from the ongoing 100 Years' War. Terceira's first governor was actually Flemish, Jacome de Bruges, and it's estimated that with him over 2,000 others arrived from Flanders. The cheeses of São Jorge and the windmills on Pico are results of this Flemish migration. The fortuitous arrival of Pedro Álvares Cabral in Brazil in 1500 and claiming it for the Portuguese crown led to an increased importance for the Azores. Flores and Corvo, they became crucial navigation points between Portugal and Brazil, and Terceira and Faial became important resupply posts. In 1522, there was a large earthquake and subsequent landslide and tsunami, which devastated Villafranca, which at the time was the largest town on São Miguel. This led to the development of Ponta Delgada, which was further down the coast and not affected as much, hardly at all, by the earthquake and landslide. And Ponta Delgada went on to become the main city of the island and eventually one of the capitals of the Azores. In the late 1500s, There were many fortifications built on the islands to protect Portuguese traders that were laden with spices and treasures from India and the Orient from privateer and pirate attack. There are at least 12 forts built on Terceira's southeast coast alone. In 1580, King Enrique of Portugal died without an heir. His brother's illegitimate son Antonio was proclaimed king. However, Felipe II of Spain felt that he had a better claim, and him being a Habsburg, he had a much greater army than that of Antonio. So Felipe basically invaded Portugal. Antonio fled to the Azores, and Felipe II of Spain became Felipe I of Portugal. With Antonio going to the Azores, this led to the Battle of Ponta Delgada as Felipe tried to bring the Azores under his control. He won the battle. Antonio fled first to France and then to England, where after the failed Spanish Armada in 1588, he became a favourite of Queen Elizabeth I, and he joined Sir Francis Drake in an attempt to win back his crown. It failed. There followed a period of English attacks on the Azores, as they were seen as Spanish as opposed to Portuguese possessions. The French and the Dutch also attacked, lots of it to do with supremacy in the Caribbean and piracy and other things like that. In 1640, Portugal gained its independence from Spain, and so the peace treaty was re-established with England and Scotland. In 1826, there was another succession crisis in the Portuguese throne. King John VI died. His eldest son, Pedro, was the constitutional heir. However, he was already the Emperor of Brazil, and as Emperor of Brazil, had declared Brazil's independence from Portugal, which obviously put a bit of a crimp in the plan of him being King of Portugal. The younger son of King John VI, Miguel, he claimed the throne. Neither Brazil nor Portugal wanted a unified monarchy, so Pedro abdicated his right in favour of his daughter, who was 7-year-old Maria. This didn't go well with Miguel, and it led to what's known as the Liberal Wars, also known as the Portuguese Civil War, between the armies of Pedro and Miguel from 1828 to 1834. Pedro abdicated his position in Brazil in favour of his son, also called Pedro, and via Britain went to the Azores to set up a government in exile. Pedro's army eventually defeated that of Miguel, but Pedro only lived for a few months after this, so his daughter Maria, who by now was 15, she became queen. She bestowed the epithet the Heroic on the city of Angra in the Azores for its support of her father. Between 1836 and 1976, the archipelago was divided into 3 administrative districts: Angra do Heroísmo, Horta, and Ponta Delgada. And you should already have seen episode 14 that I did about them and the stamps from those particular districts. During World War II, the UK and the US used air and naval bases in the Azores. There was a brief cry for Azorean independence after the 1974 Portuguese Carnation Revolution, but in 1976 the Azores became an autonomous region of Portugal and a special territory of the European Union. The stamp issuing history: from 1868 to 1930, pretty much all of the stamps released for the Azores are Portuguese overprinted stamps. Not all of them, but the vast majority. In the middle of that time, between 1892 and 1905, stamps for the 3 administrative districts were also released. Again, check out episode 14 if you haven't. From 1980 to the present day, stamps inscribed both Portugal and the Azores have been issued. The currency, up until 1911, was 1,000 reis to be 1 mil reis. Then from 1911 to 2001, 100 centavos was 1 escudo. And from 2002 to the present day, 100 cents to the euro. The earliest stamps I have from the Azores are these ones. They're newspaper stamps. And as I said just now, like the majority of the early Azorean stamps, they are Portugal stamps or Portuguese stamps overprinted with the Azores. The larger overprint on the left is from 1876, the smaller overprints from 1882. The currency is in reis. These are telegraph tax stamps from 1885. Again, there's a variety of different overprints. Here you can see a black and a red one. A King Louis I stamp overprinted from 1887. This was for the 500th birth anniversary of Henry the Navigator, released in 1894. And this one was one of the few sets that were actually inscribed Azores. You can see in the circle or the oval there. This one was from 400 years since the discovery of the sea route to India by Vasco da Gama, released in 1898. In 1908, King Carlos and his son and heir, Luis Felipe, were assassinated. And after a brief coming and going, there was a declaration of Portugal becoming a republic in 1910. Both these stamps are from 1911. One is from the Vasco da Gama series that we just saw, and the one on the right is a postage due. So they are one's inscribed Azores, one's overprinted Azores, and both overprinted Republica. These Ceres stamps I got into a bit of trouble with. I started to look them up. I thought, I wonder if there's differences. I wonder if there's a lot of varieties. Short answer, yes. And in the end, I didn't really ever find out. I was looking at the Portugal ones on their own, then the Azorean ones, the overprints. There are so many different print runs, different issues, different papers, different ways of overprinting. I haven't yet finished, let's be honest, I haven't really started sorting out which of the issues or the series these are from, but they basically ran from 1912 to 1931. The only ones that can be pretty definite about are the surcharged ones on the right. They're from 1929. And you'll notice that these are now in centavos and escudo. The dark blue one at the bottom right is 1 escudo 25. This is a charity stamp from 1915 saying for the poor. Postage due stamps on the left from 1918 and parcel post stamps on the right from 1921. Again, all Portuguese stamps overprinted with the Azores. This set is the centenary issue of Camilo Castelo Branco from 1925. He was a prolific Portuguese writer with apparently over 260 published works, with, and I quote, a dramatic and sentimental style with a combination of sarcasm, bitterness, and dark humour. He was imprisoned twice, firstly for illegally exhuming his first wife's body, and secondly for having an adulterous affair with the wife of a businessman from Porto. Both he and the wife were imprisoned, and during that time, Castelo Branco wrote his best-known novel, Doomed Love, and the female protagonist from that novel is shown in the stamps on the second row, the 50 cents and the 75 cent stamp. After their release from prison, a couple of months later, the businessman died, and Castelo Branco married the widow. These are from 1925 as well, postal and telegraph tax war memorial charity stamps. These two sets, the left-hand set is the second independent series from 1927, and the right is the third from 1928. The left-hand ones show an 11th century knight, the castle at Guimarães, and one of the battles against the Spanish in the 1600s. The third independent series, it shows a crusader, the conquest of Santarém, and the Battle of Rolliça, which was when an Anglo-Portuguese army fought against Napoleon in 1808. And aside from the surcharge Ceres stamps, which I showed you earlier, these were the last from the first period of Azorean stamps. So we now move on to the modern period. This is the first set released that were inscribed with both Portugal and the Azores. This was in 1980, and it's the 112th anniversary of the first Azorean stamps. Also from 1980, this set to commemorate the World Tourism Conference in Manila in the Philippines. 1981, the Europa Folklore set. This shows the Cavalcade of St. Peter on the island of São Miguel. On June the 29th, there is a horseback parade, and people dressed as knights go around the town, finishing up in St. Peter's Church. 1982, regional architecture. This is one of what are known as the Empires of the Holy Spirit, which is part of the Azorean Catholic tradition. There are many of these small temples. On Terceira, there are at least 33 of them, and this is where small rituals are performed. This is the Temple of San Sebastian. 1987, windows and balconies from Santa Cruz de Graciosa. And finally, my most recent stamps. These are transport of the Azores. On the right, by the way, is a postcard that I sent to my parents, and I sent it from Lisbon, and it has a Portuguese stamp, the one on the left, as well as the Portugal Azores stamp on the right. That 65 escudo stamp shows a ship named after Carvalho Araujo, who was a Portuguese naval officer killed in World War I, protecting a cargo ship bound for Ponta Delgada. The 85 escudo stamp there in the middle shows the MV Funchal, an ocean liner that between 1961 and 1974 sailed Lisbon, Azores, Funchal route. Then, from 1974 to 1985, it sailed between Dover and Zeebrugge to the Azores, Madeira, and Cape Verde, as well as occasionally to Rio. Since then, it's been sold to become a static hotel, but it doesn't seem to be one quite yet. Some cryptocurrency overlord has bought it. Anyway, my name is Keith. These are my stamps of the Azores. Goodbye.